I stood at the edge of the stage, diploma in hand, the crowd on their feet. It should have been the proudest moment of my life, but just seconds before, I heard my mother whisper behind me, "You're not special." Her words hit harder than any failure ever had. I almost froze, almost turned back. But then, before I could blink, First Lady Michelle Taylor walked across the stage, pulled me into a tight hug, and whispered something no one else heard. That's when everything changed. But to understand why she hugged me, you need to know the truth I was never supposed to find. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a household where love was measured, and attention was a currency I never had enough of. My older brother, Nathan, had it all. Straight A's, medals, a full ride to West Point. Mom called him my little soldier, even when he towered over her. Dad would slap his back at the dinner table and say, "You're gonna make us proud, son." I was there too, quiet, obedient, trying to fold myself into spaces they forgot existed. I remember winning the National Essay Contest my sophomore year. My piece was about silence and how it builds walls between people. I printed the certificate, framed it myself, and hung it in the hallway. It stayed there for a day. The next morning it had been taken down. Mom looked at me and said, "It's just a school essay, Emily. Don't let it get to your head." I nodded. That day I learned to hide my pride like a guilty pleasure. Most days I felt like furniture, useful, present, but not really seen. I made straight A's, never got into trouble, cleaned the dishes before being asked. Nathan once forgot my birthday. Mom reminded him 2 days later and he said, "Oh, right. Happy belated, Em." She laughed like it was adorable. I laughed too. But inside something cracked just a little. One night I stayed up late reading in the hallway. I heard Mom in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice was sharp, hushed. I only took her in because I had no choice. She was just a baby. What else was I supposed to do? But she's not mine. She never will be. I didn't breathe. My body froze, books slipping to the floor. I didn't cry that night. I just stared at the ceiling, trying to remember a time she ever called me her daughter. I tried to shake it off the next day, pretending I hadn't heard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't about me. But in the attic weeks later, helping Mom with old boxes, I found it. A birth certificate with a different last name. Monroe. Emily Monroe. My heart dropped. Beneath it, a sealed envelope, addressed to me. Never opened. The handwriting was elegant, curved letters like someone who still believed in poetry. I opened it. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means the truth is finally reaching you. I was not brave enough to protect you the way I should have. I was silenced. My name is Claire Monroe. I worked for the Department of Environmental Affairs. I exposed something I wasn't supposed to. They called it suicide, but it wasn't. I tried to keep you safe by giving you to my sister. Please forgive me. Please find your own voice. You deserve more than I ever had." I didn't know how long I sat there, letter in hand. Mom had lied. Everyone had lied. And I wasn't a Carter. I was a Monroe, daughter of a whistleblower framed and erased. I wasn't raised in love. I was hidden in obligation. Suddenly, all the little things made sense. The distance, the looks, the way my accomplishments were brushed aside. That night I wrote a letter to Mom. I never gave it to her. I folded it neatly, slid it under my mattress. "Dear Mom, if that's what I can still call you, I know the truth now, and I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. But I need you to know something. I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not a placeholder. I may not be a Carter by blood, but I am someone. I am enough. and I will not live under this silence any longer. For days after, I said nothing. I went through the motions. I smiled when spoken to. I helped with dinner. But something had changed. I no longer craved approval. I was no longer begging to be noticed. I had a mission now. I would find a way to make my story heard, even if I had to whisper it into the void, again and again, until someone finally listened. I didn't scream. I didn't rebel. I didn't confront her about the letter or the truth. That wasn't how I was raised. Instead, I did what I'd always done best. I kept my head down and wrote. Late at night, under the soft hum of my desk lamp, I poured my silence into stories. I created characters with mothers who never looked them in the eye, daughters who won awards and celebrated alone. I gave them names, settings, and voices I wish I'd had. One post turned into 5, then 15. I shared them anonymously on an online forum about family trauma. To my surprise, people read them. Then they shared them. Some wrote back, "You're telling my story." Others said, "I thought I was alone." Their words stitched a small seam in the tear inside me. I wasn't invisible after all. School became my refuge. I threw myself into debate, into literature, into internships. I wasn't just good. I was the best, at least on paper. Valedictorian, 2-time essay contest winner, editor of the campus journal. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. I didn't want to be seen out of pity. I wanted to be undeniable. Then came the email. Subject line, commencement speech nominee, urgent. I'd been chosen to speak at graduation. My hands shook as I read it, not out of fear, but because for the first time someone saw me. Not because they had to, not because I was an obligation, but because of my voice. I kept the news to myself for a week. I practiced the speech in my room, whispering lines to the mirror. To anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, I see you. I was you. Then, one quiet evening, while I was slicing apples in the kitchen, Mom walked in. She didn't look up from her phone when she said it. "You're not special, Emily. Don't let this school thing make you think you are." Just like that. No malice. Just fact. Delivered like weather. I froze mid-slice. My knuckles whitened on the knife handle. For a heartbeat, I wanted to yell. Tell her everything. Who I was. What I knew. What she'd hidden. But I didn't. I just stared at the apple, then threw the pieces in the trash. That night, I received an anonymous email. "I knew your mother. The real one. Her story isn't over. Neither is yours." No signature. No return address. Just a whisper from the past, clawing its way into the present. It didn't take long before the backlash came. Someone, maybe a family member, maybe a classmate, found the anonymous blog and connected the dots. My stories were suddenly not so anonymous. Screenshots circulated. My name was attached. Then came the phone calls, the texts, the whispers at church. Ungrateful. Making a spectacle. Just wants attention. I came home one afternoon to find Mom sitting in the living room, her face pale with fury. "How could you? You think painting this family as villains makes you brave?" Her voice cracked, not from pain, but from the fear of what people would think. Dad stood in the doorway, silent, disappointed. Nathan didn't even show up. I locked myself in my room, curled on the floor, and thought about deleting everything. The posts, the speech, myself. But instead I opened the letter from my mother, my real mother. The ink had faded slightly, but the message hadn't. "Please find your own voice. You deserve more than I ever had." That night I went to the campus library. It was nearly empty. I sat on the floor between aisles of forgotten books and whispered the speech to no one. My voice cracked, then steadied. I felt like I was talking to her, not my adoptive mother, but the woman who'd written me that letter, Claire Monroe. I imagined her sitting across from me, nodding, saying, "Say it. Say all of it." The next morning, I checked my inbox before class. There it was, an official statement from the office of the First Lady. My latest blog post had been shared on her official platform. A brave, anonymous voice shedding light on what many hide. Thank you. I read it 3 times. I couldn't breathe. My anonymous story had reached the most powerful woman in the country, and she had believed me. By noon, a second email arrived, from her assistant. Formal invitation. Subject, commencement guest speaker, Emily Monroe Carter. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it knew this moment would change everything. I hit reply, and I said yes. 2 weeks before graduation, I received a message that only said, "She was more than what they told you. Come to room 304, Literature Hall." No name, no subject, just a time and place. I almost deleted it. But curiosity outweighed fear. The door to room 304 creaked open with the weight of years. Inside sat an older man, silver hair, tweed blazer, eyes that held more stories than books. He stood when he saw me. "Emily," he said softly, "I've waited a long time to meet you." His name was Professor Alan Whitmore. He had been my mother's thesis advisor, her mentor, her friend. "She wasn't weak," he began, before I could even ask. "Claire was brilliant, fierce. She wanted to change things. And she got close. Too close." I listened in silence as he told me the real story. Claire Monroe wasn't just a junior analyst. She had risen fast. So fast the wrong people noticed. She'd discovered illegal environmental cover-ups tied to high-ranking officials. When she tried to go public, the media spun her into a mentally unstable whistleblower. Days later, she was found dead in holding. "Suicide," they said. But Professor Whitmore never believed it. "They silenced her," he whispered. "And I didn't speak up. I was threatened. I was scared. I've lived with that shame every day." He pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of letters Claire had written to journalists, policy memos she had drafted, even a photo of her standing beside the governor. She wasn't just someone's sister or a cautionary tale. She was a leader, a fighter, a voice they tried to erase. I walked out of room 304 heavier, but not with grief, with clarity. My mother didn't die weak. She died because she was powerful, and I carried that power now. 3 days later, I visited her grave for the first time. It was quiet, tucked behind the chapel, under an old oak tree. The headstone was simple. Claire Monroe, 1974-2005. Beloved sister, no mention of daughter or mother. I sat cross-legged in front of it, pulling the unfinished manuscript from my bag. I placed it at the base of the stone. "I'm still writing it," I whispered. "But this time, they'll read it. I promise." Tears didn't fall in waves, just 1, 2, slow and deliberate, a storm that had learned to control itself. I stood to leave, and that's when I saw them. Fresh lilies, still dewy, tied with a blue ribbon. Someone had been here recently, someone who came regularly. My name wasn't on the grave, but maybe my presence had never gone unnoticed after all. I walked away with a purpose that felt older than me. I was no longer waiting to be validated. I didn't need a stage, a hug, or even an apology. I just needed to write. The book launched 2 weeks later. The Invisible Daughter. I self-published it online with no expectations. I checked the download count the next morning, 1,243. By evening it had passed 10,000. The story of a girl born in silence, raised in shadows, and determined to be heard, resonated. Emails flooded in, from daughters, sons, mothers, strangers who had carried their silence like scars. I read every one. Then came the twist. A non-profit called Hopeline reached out. They worked with youth survivors of emotional neglect. Someone anonymously donated a large sum. They said, under the name Carter. The note just said, for the ones still unheard. I didn't need to guess who sent it. I'd used my birth name, Monroe, for the book. Only one person knew both worlds. Only one would have sent money without taking credit. Would have used the name that still meant something in her world. I imagined her scrolling on her phone, reading a paragraph, then quietly clicking donate. Not for recognition, but because maybe she finally understood. Have you ever forgiven someone who made you feel invisible? I asked my readers in a follow-up post. Not because they said sorry, but because you chose peace over permission. The comment section exploded. On the morning of graduation, I wasn't thinking about medals or speeches. I was thinking about my mother, both of them, the one who birthed me and the one who raised me, flawed, afraid, but maybe trying in her own broken way. The auditorium was packed. Faculty lined the stage. My name was called. I stepped forward. My heart thudded in my chest like a war drum. Then I saw her, back row, alone, in a navy dress I hadn't seen in years. Mom, Linda Carter. Her eyes met mine. No smile, just a slow nod. Not pride, but something close, something trying. I took a breath and walked toward the microphone. The spotlight felt hotter than I expected. My palms were damp against the wooden podium as I looked out over a sea of faces, graduates in caps and gowns, proud families clapping, faculty smiling politely. But my eyes searched for only one. Back row, navy blue. Her gaze met mine, stern, unreadable. And still, she was here. I took a breath and let the words I had memorized crumble. I spoke not from the speech I'd rehearsed, but from the scar tissue I had carried. When I was a child, I believed love was something you earned. That if I was quiet enough, helpful enough, smart enough, someone would look at me and say, you matter. But sometimes you can do everything right and still feel invisible. The room was silent. I was told I'm not special, I continued, voice shaking but firm. And maybe I'm not. Not in the way people define it. But I am special because I never stopped believing I was worthy, even when no one else did. There was a beat of silence so pure it hurt. Then, applause. A slow build, then a roar. And then it happened. The screen behind me flickered to life. A video message played, unexpected, unscheduled. The First Lady of the United States appeared. She was seated at her desk, eyes direct, voice steady. To Emily Monroe Carter, she began, your words have traveled further than you know. You gave voice to the voiceless. And today I stand, not just as First Lady, but as a woman who sees you. The clip ended, and the real First Lady, Michelle Taylor herself, stood from the VIP section and walked up to the stage. The room erupted. She embraced me with warmth I hadn't known in years. Close enough for no one else to hear, she whispered. She would be proud. My knees nearly buckled. As I stepped back, breath stolen, my eyes scanned the crowd again. My mother, Linda, still sat in the back. Her hands were clenched, her jaw tight, but her eyes were glistening. She looked down, wiped a tear. The applause swelled again, but I barely heard it. I turned to look at her once more, needing to know if she saw me now. But the seat was empty. She had left. The aftershock came fast. Interviews, articles, invitations. Social media exploded with clips of the speech and the First Lady's hug. Hashtags trended. People called me brave, a voice for the silent, a national symbol of resilience. But back home, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Nathan didn't call. My aunt blocked me. The group chat with cousins had disappeared. At church, no one looked me in the eye. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I had chosen truth, but late at night, in the quiet of my apartment, I scrolled through old photos, birthdays, Christmas mornings, blurry dinners, and wondered if I had burned a bridge I could never rebuild. One night I sat alone at the train station. It was nearly midnight. My suitcase sat beside me, unopened. I wasn't going anywhere. I just needed somewhere that didn't echo. I opened the Notes app on my phone, reading over the draft of a message I had written weeks ago but never sent. I know you probably hate me. I just wanted you to know. I never did this to hurt you. I just needed to stop hurting myself. I stared at the words, thumb hovering over send. Then my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Just one line. Check your mailbox. I went home. Inside the small metal slot was a cream envelope. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Precise, slanted right, like every letter had been debated. Emily. I watched you on that stage. I didn't clap because I was in shock. I didn't stay because I didn't know how. But I did cry. I cried because I realized something too late. You deserved more than what I gave you. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know. I see you now. Mom. I read it twice, then again. My throat ached. There were no grand declarations, no promises, just honesty, finally. Weeks later, I sat at my desk, preparing the guest list for the launch of my second book. It wasn't about trauma this time. It was about healing, about building something from the ashes. I opened a fresh envelope and began to write. Dear Mom, I'm having a book event. I don't know if you'll want to come, but if you do, there'll be a seat in the front row, with your name on it. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, small, quiet, and often when I least expected it. I started therapy 2 weeks after the graduation speech went viral. I sat across from a woman with kind eyes and a silence that didn't demand filling. For the first few sessions, I barely spoke. I listened to the clock tick, to my breath, to the air between words I hadn't yet learned to say. But slowly, I started. I talked about growing up in a house where love had terms and affection had expiration dates. I talked about Claire Monroe and Linda Carter, about writing and not being believed, about what it meant to be raised by a woman who never called me hers, while carrying the blood of one who died trying to protect a truth. My therapist gave me tools I didn't know I needed. How to set boundaries without guilt, how to forgive without forgetting, how to speak without shrinking. One day she looked at me and said, "You've lived your life trying to be worthy of love. What if I told you that you already are?" That line broke something open in me. Not a wound, but a lock. Outside the office, I started to live differently. I stopped explaining myself to people who'd never tried to understand me. I said no, without apology. I stopped seeking permission to be exactly who I was. And when I did, something beautiful happened. People who truly saw me began to find me. Every Friday, I volunteered at a youth center in the city. I read books aloud to girls who barely spoke above whispers. I taught them how to write letters they'd never send, just like I once did. One afternoon, I looked up mid-sentence and caught the eyes of a girl, no older than 10. Wide, alert, hungry for connection. She didn't say a word, just nodded, as if to say, "Me too." I nearly cried on the spot. That night I wrote a chapter not meant for publishing. It was just for her, for every girl who had ever felt invisible, who had grown up under the weight of someone else's silence. Then came the call. It was a blocked number. I almost didn't answer. "Miss Carter?" the voice said. It was male, formal. "I'm contacting you on behalf of a private party who once worked with your mother, Claire Monroe." I sat up straighter. "She wasn't wrong," he continued, "and she didn't die by choice." His name was withheld, but his words carried weight. He said he had evidence, memos, phone recordings, internal correspondence. Claire had uncovered a system-wide cover-up involving environmental toxins linked to pediatric cancers in low-income neighborhoods. She'd been preparing to testify. Her suicide had come 2 days before her scheduled deposition. "We buried more than a woman," he said. "We buried a cause." He emailed me the files. I opened them in stunned silence. Documents bearing seals from federal departments, warnings marked confidential. I printed every page, laid them out across my floor, and just sat there, surrounded by the truth. That's when I knew what I had to do next. I shelved the fiction manuscript I'd been working on and started a new project, a historical novel based on my mother's final days. I called it The Final Voice. It would be fiction only by name. The story would expose the corruption, the silence, the injustice, and it would be told through the eyes of her daughter, me. But that wasn't enough. I wanted something lasting, tangible, a legacy beyond books and speeches. So I built one, with the royalties from The Invisible Daughter and help from donors who had followed my story. I founded the Unheard Daughters Foundation. Our mission: to support young women navigating emotional neglect and family-based trauma. We offered scholarships, therapy programs, creative writing grants. We gave them a place to speak and be heard. The media called me a national voice of her generation. I grinned at the headlines, but what mattered more were the letters I received. Because of you, I spoke up. Because of you, I left. Because of you, I stayed alive. And then, one rainy afternoon, just as I was finishing the third draft of The Final Voice, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there. Linda. My mother. Or the woman who once tried to be. She looked older, not just from time, but from something deeper. Her hair pulled back, hands trembling as she held a sealed box. "I won't stay," she said. I needed to give you this." She held it out. "It belonged to Claire. I kept it all these years. I shouldn't have." The box was wooden, scratched at the corners. I took it from her gently, confused, cautious. "She wrote in it every day," Linda whispered. "But I never read it. I couldn't." I nodded. She turned to go. Before the door closed, I said softly, "Thank you." She paused. "Emily, I did love you. I just didn't know how." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Later that night, I opened the box. Inside, a stack of leather-bound journals. The handwriting was hers, Claire's, slanted, full of loops, impatient with emotion. Today, Emily smiled in her sleep. She has her father's eyes, but my stubbornness. I pray she'll grow up in truth, not shadows. Page after page, year after year, my mother's thoughts, fears, hopes. A record of a love I was never meant to doubt. I wept, but not from pain, from wholeness. We sat across from each other in my apartment, 2 cups of untouched tea between us. The silence wasn't the usual one. Cold, rigid, filled with unsaid judgments. This one was softer, hesitant, like neither of us knew how to begin. Linda Carter, my mother by law, not by blood, looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Just more human. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the napkin on her lap, eyes fixed somewhere behind me. "I used to hate how much you looked like her," she finally said. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Claire," she clarified. "Same mouth, same defiant stare when you believed in something." I stayed quiet. "She was always larger than life," Linda went on. "Even as kids, people listened when she spoke. She didn't care what anyone thought. I did. Still do." There it was. The root. Not cruelty, not coldness, jealousy. A deep, aching envy, wrapped in fear and silence. "I wasn't supposed to raise you," she said. "But when Claire died, I couldn't let you go to strangers. I thought I could protect you by keeping you small, safe. But I see now, I only kept you silent." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were glassy, not from performance, but from truth finally being spoken. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her. From the shelf, I pulled the wooden box she'd given me. Inside, I had found dozens of pages, but one stood out, a folded piece of blue stationery, different from the others. I handed it to her. She stared at it, unfolded it slowly. Read. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You kept this?" I asked softly. She nodded, choking back tears. It was a letter Claire had written, days before her death, addressed to me. It never made it into the box with the rest of the journals. Linda had held on to it, all these years. "I couldn't let go," she said. "I couldn't let her be the only one you loved." The letter was brief, but piercing. "My dearest Emily, if the world ever makes you feel small, I want you to know. It isn't because you are. It's because you are light, and some people are afraid of what they can't dim." That night, after Linda left, I sat on the floor of my room and pulled out a notebook. I wrote a letter to myself, to 12-year-old Emily. "You won't believe this now, but one day you'll stand in a room full of people who see you. Not because you beg them to, but because you dared to be real. Your pain will become your power. Your silence will become your voice. And your name, Emily Monroe Carter, will never again be hidden." It wasn't for publishing. It was just for her. For me. For the girl who waited too long to be told she mattered. Months passed. The final voice manuscript went to print, backed by the evidence the government couldn't deny. There were lawsuits, investigations, but also healing, apologies, change. I kept writing. I kept speaking. I kept showing up for the girls who hadn't yet found their volume. And then came the day I returned to where it all began. The auditorium was smaller than I remembered, the walls still lined with faded banners. I stood on the same stage where I once felt invisible and looked out at rows of girls with wide eyes and tight grips on their folders. The first ever Claire Monroe Scholarship was ready to be awarded. I stepped to the mic, heart steady. "This scholarship isn't just about academic achievement," I said. "It's about resilience, about courage, about daring to believe in your own worth when no one else will." I opened the envelope. The recipient this year is Ava Thompson. A girl in the third row froze, then slowly stood. She was small, maybe 15, with oversized glasses and a posture that screamed, "Don't notice me." I recognized that posture. I had worn it for years. She walked up, trembling. I handed her the envelope and she whispered something only I could hear. I wrote in the application that I feel invisible at home. I nodded, took her hand, held it tightly. "Do you know what makes you visible, Ava?" I asked. She shook her head. "You exist," I said. "You feel. You speak. That's enough. You are enough." And then, just before she turned to leave the stage, I leaned down and whispered the final words I needed someone to say to me once. "You're special, and you're going to show the world why." She looked up, eyes wide, lips parting in disbelief. And in that moment, I knew the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every girl who had ever been silenced, every girl who'd ever been told she wasn't enough, and every one of them was about to prove otherwise.